Are they mosaics? Are they mystical animals? Beautiful flowers, inspiration from Hawaii are all part of Christi Friesen's work. Watch this now. Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Walton and welcome to Artist Stories. Today I'm talking to Christi Friesen in Hawaii, which is lovely. Hi Christi. We're going to talk about some of your work, and normally I would describe people as a jewelry artist, but you're much more than a jewelry artist, aren't you?
I'm so indescribable. I started off doing a lot of jewelry, but it's always been sculptural. So even my jewelry was sculptural, and now so much more of my work is purely sculpture, even though I sneak in those brooches and pendants from time to time. So yeah, I call myself a sculptural artist.
Sounds good to me. I believe that you haven't always lived in Hawaii.
No, this is a new thing for me, and I'm just like so tickled to be here. I'm on the island of Maui, and it came about really oddly in 2019, like a year of just world travel, teaching everywhere. I was changing my life and took off on the road. And then at the end of that, I was scheduled to come see my brother who lives in Maui, and he's lived here for, 15 years or something. And I said, I want to touch down. Is it okay? And he said, yeah. And when I got here, I was like, how long can I stay? As long as you like. So that was a year and a half ago. And I just loved it. As soon as I got here, I vacationed in Hawaii, but never thought of it as a place to live. And it just felt like home, and I have been loving every single day of it. So yeah, this is where I've put my roots down.
Excellent, excellent. So we're going to have a look at some of your work.
This is a great one to start off with because it's very Australian, because it has that boomerang look to it. It's very indicative of where I am right now and what I do. And I've always done sculptural things. I have done almost exclusively polymer clay artwork for many years, but in the last couple of years, I've really segued into incorporating both polymer epoxy clay and this mosaic assemblage like you're seeing here. So this is using 24 karat gold leaf with a sgraffito technique, which is a fancy way of saying you scratch off some of the gold so you can doodle. And you'll notice all those lovely little opal chips up at the top.
Yes.
I was in Australia as part of my 2019 world tour, and one of my missions while I was in the land down under was to find as much opal chips as I could, because I just love it. And I was very lucky to get little bits and pieces from all those fossickers down there, and I incorporated them into this piece. So this is a brooch, but it's like where my heart is, like moving all these different pieces together and playing with sculptural and drawing, because I love both of those aspects.
Technical question: are they embedded in the clay?
Or yes, because the epoxy clay is actually like a cement. So it can be molded similar to polymer clay, although for me, it's not as easy to sculpt with it. That's why I do most of my sculpting in polymer. So the gold part that you see there, it's like a polymer piece that I've put the gold on and scratched through, and then embedded that into a form of epoxy clay. I can just stick everything in, all those little shards and pearls and crystals, everything glues itself in as the stuff dries. So with polymer, you have to embed it, because polymer is a plastic, so things don't really readily stick to it. They have to be, anchored. But with epoxy clay, I can just shove stuff all over. It's an air dry thing, which is cool, because if you need it to go in the oven, like a lot of times I'll put little legs on glass vessels and they'll air dry, and now I've got this form, and then I build polymer over it, and then that can go in the oven because the polymer has to cure in the oven. So it's really great. It can go in and out of the oven without any problem, but it itself is a two-part. Once the two parts are mixed, you've got several hours of work time, and then it takes a full 24 to completely harden, and then it's just rock solid. So it's really great stuff to stick and embed all these mosaic bits into. I love it. Oh, just love it.
So if you're using 24 karat gold and real opals and seed pearls and things like that, these are quite expensive items.
I guess it depends on what's expensive in your opinion, but yeah, they're not like $20 pieces or whatever. But I feel if I'm going to take the time to really make a piece that I think looks really good, then I don't want to cheapen it by just using cheap stuff. So something like this would probably be a couple $100, depending on how much stuff is in it. So I feel like that's reasonable, but it certainly isn't just something you'd pick up on your little shopping spree or whatever, something you have to think about for a minute or two. But yeah, they are more expensive. And there's that gold again. I just love gold. And the neat thing about the 24 karat gold, as you mentioned, is that you get the richness that gold has without it being horribly expensive. So I use the octopus has some in it, and the other little bits and pieces there do. But this one's all polymer. It's a same kind of like collage style where I'm playing with the clay to make these fun little patterns and swirly bits and stuff, and then put them all together. I used to do a lot of painted papers that I cut in collage, which was a lot of fun, and I've just translated it into a more sculptural thing. That little twisty trick is on my YouTube channel. So if you go to my YouTube channel, one of the things is there's a little Christi or something like that, and it just shows you how to manipulate the clay using your thumb and swirling it to get those little swirls. So that's like a little freebie out there for anybody who wants to try it.
Links, including your YouTube channel and website, etc., are all in the description box down below.
I know you're very well known for your quilting. This doesn't have the quilting top stitching, which is severely lacking, but just in terms of making these things that almost feel fabric-like, and then cutting them and assembling them together into something that kind of has that feel. This is a series that I've done with that same kind of collage effect. This is, to me, one of the things that polymer clay excels at above all the materials out there, and was what got me started in the first place, because I used to work early in my life with earth and, kiln fired clays. And of course I've painted and drawn and all that stuff, which I still love. But the polymer has the color immediate. It's like the colors are there. Whatever you blend is how it stays. It doesn't shrink or change. Other than if you burn it, it's going to be what it is. So you can play with all of these colors and textures and have them sculptural like this. So you see more of those little swirly bits and more of the gold leaf, but just playing with patterns, combining the clay, making stripes, making slices, all that kind of stuff. I do a lot of tutorials. I've got, oh gosh, I don't know, 100, 150 tutorials. Some are downloadable PDFs, some are videos, and we go through things like this. So you can browse through and see what interests you. So I tend to lean towards creating a project. While you're making that project, you're incorporating stuff like this. Has a lot of technique about how to manipulate the clay to get the stripes and the blends and the swirls. And then when you put it all together, it's kind of, ooh, and hopefully that opens that creative window for somebody to go, ooh, it's in that room, and go exploring after they've played with the concept. But I like doing this. I thought you might get a real kick out of these because it probably is right up your alley.
Definitely. There's a lot of crossover in any of these art forms.
Yeah, as you can see, like we were talking about sculptural, I just bounce all around from three-dimensional forms or ornamentation of jewelry and stuff and wall pieces. I do a lot of live chats on Facebook. And when COVID hit, when everybody was getting locked in place and being at home, and there was an initial part, and I'm sure you felt it amongst your craft people, of like, okay, this is weird, but one of the silver linings is I'm at home and I can finally do a little bit of creating, which I haven't been able to do forever. So I started doing a Sunday morning live chat free in one of my groups where we all just got together, we chit chat and have a little social time and then create something. So I did that for the whole year. And then this year, since that whole kind of thing has morphed and we're changing and getting to a different stage of all of this, that live chat now goes, I have a membership group. It's like a $10 a month kind of a creative circle membership group, which you can find on my website. But so I still do the live chats in there. And every second Sunday of the month, I do it in my free Facebook page. But this is one of the projects that we did in one of those live chats. So it's like showing how to use an armature, how to add, those are little tourmaline chunks pressed into epoxy clay on the horn. So it was a kind of combination of epoxy and polymer clay. So this one was a bit more extravagant than some of the projects, but some of them were quite involved and we really got some creativity done. But this was fun. And my favorite of all of this, after you chat with people and you show them how to make something, is then for the next week or two or month after, you get to see everybody's versions of these just popping up all over internet and the Facebooks. It's kind of really fun to see how people take it, the colors they choose and the variations they make. So I love that part. I love seeing people take what you've shown them and making it their own.
Now, what's this? Looks like a painting, but it's not, is it?
I lived in California before I went on my Escape from My Problems tour, and I put all my stuff in storage. So then COVID hit and all of my stuff was stuck on the mainland while I was here in Hawaii, which I found things to do and found other stuff. But finally, I went back and rescued all my things, sent it all back here. And as I'm going through these boxes and unearthing all the stuff I put in storage, I came across this. I did this when I was in Ireland, again, part of that 2019 grand tour. And this is Encaustic. So Encaustic is a melted wax. It's pigmented, resonated wax. It's one of the oldest forms of painting on the planet. It goes way back into Greco-Egyptian times, but it's really fascinating because you are painting with this hot wax and you can build up these layers. And I was just playing with it in Ireland because I was teaching my own workshop to my group, but another lady was there who was doing the workshop before me and lived in the town and was doing another one after me. And she was a Encaustic. So she wanted to learn about polymer and I wanted to learn about Encaustic. So after my group was done, we had a play day. So what I found with this is off to the side, you can see those little crackly things off on the other side. Those are all just little slivers of polymer. So flat pieces of polymer with crackle surfaces on them. And we wanted to see, can you embed, we knew we could put papers in Encaustic, could you embed small pieces of polymer into the wax as well? And it worked out great. So this is something I'd love to get back to and play with more. Encaustics take a little bit more space because you got electric frying pans of melting wax all over the place. You need a little bit of space. And my little studio here in Maui is very small. It's my bedroom. I roll from the bed onto my table. So there's no room for big boiling vats of wax. But when I get a bigger spot, I'm going to go back and play with this a bit more. You can't tell as much from the picture, but you build up layers and layers. So the polymer sticks up, the edges stick up, everything's got dimension to it, which I don't just find fascinating.
I'm interested in the paper in the corner.
Yeah, she had some bits and scraps of paper that her students could use. And this was some old letter. I don't know how old it was back in the day when they wrote with ink on the paper. And it was written on both sides. So when the wax gets it, it saturates the paper, makes it almost transparent. And you can see that it's written on both sides, which is cool. Just one more way to play. This one is polymer and the epoxy clay mosaic stuff again. I haven't done a workshop with this lately, but I do these online workshops that are built through the Facebook format. And I'll probably add this to the repertoire in the new year. But the fish itself is a polymer clay body and thin sheets of polymer, bake them and snip them into little tiles, and then use a process to completely coat this polymer form with polymer tiles, which is a lot of fun. It lets you really play with it in a way that you can't so much do with other kinds of mosaics as easily. And then everything else, there's lapis, there's gold coated beads. There's a bunch of vintage jewelry components. I had a friend who had like a box full of these old from turn of the century and early 1900s, and they would cut pieces out of them to reassemble to make the new originals that they would then cast. So it was this bucket full of all this weird hodgepodge of junk. And so there's buttons in there and cutout bits, and then mother of pearl up at the top. Those are all buttons. And then mother of pearl chips and just regular old tube beads. But I just loved how all the pieces came together. I got to play with so many different things, like those little lapis slabs. I just had come across like a bucket full of the lapis, and lapis can be that kind of almost an ugly gray with hardly any blue in it, or it can be this intense blue. And the bucket was about half and half. So I picked out all the good ones and used them in here. But I love the flow. To me, it's always about the movement, trying to make the piece feel like it's going someplace and you're just watching it go. That's always important to me. I like that movement. And this one really, I thought, did well. Sometimes I do great, sometimes I don't. This was one of the ones that did. I sell everything. And when I'm making something, I'm enjoying the joy of what I'm making more so than needing to hold on to the finished product. Now, I know a lot of artists who they're attached to their work. They don't like to sell it. And whatever works for you is great. But I do it with the idea that someone else is going to get to enjoy this, and that brings me pleasure. But there are a few pieces, very few over the years, that I've kept for myself, and this is one of them. This one I liked enough to snag that one and put it aside just for me. Okay, I got to tell you about these little weirdos. This is one of about 1 million of these glow-in-the-dark Ghoulies. I've made these things ever since I was a kid, when I had earth and clay. Back then I called them blobs. It's a blob of clay with a face on it. And they were always super popular. And I've had this sort of love-hate affair with these things for a while when I'm going to be a serious artist. I tried not to make them, but I'll tell you what, they make me smile. They make other people smile. I've made hundreds and hundreds of them. They are all different. Sometimes they have arms. Sometimes they don't. They almost never have feet, and it's just a weird face, and they're made with glow in the dark polymer, so they do glow at night, that lovely glowing green color. I just enjoy them. So I have made peace with this and realized that screw whatever preconceived notions I have of my artistic integrity. I like making these, and people like them, and I fully embrace them. So now I have made so many this past year, because each time I do one of these special Facebook events, we'll do something. They always like to make the Ghoulies, so we always do these little glow in the dark weirdos. So yeah, there's a lot of them out there, and I find them endlessly distracting, and I just have a great time. Yeah, they're here to stay. They can be as weird as you want. You can just let your inner child out. Lots of teeth always. And I find the ones that are grumpy are the ones that people like the most. So whenever I make one that's scowling or sad or frustrated looking, and those are the ones, oh, we got to adopt that one and make them feel better. So maybe that's our mothering instinct coming to the rise. But yeah, this one was gargoyle.
So back to the original type of work that we saw at the beginning. So this is another combination piece with opals again.
This I loved how this one turned out too. And look, it's that same sort of weird bean boomerang shapes, but this one combines the same kind of thing, that sort of sculptural sgraffito doodling thing on gold leaf. And I've incorporated the opals again because I love those. There's a bunch of pearls up there. That funky little stuff at the very top. A lot of people have asked me, like, what stone is that? It's actually just shards of raku pottery. I ran into a potter here. Pre-COVID, there was a bunch of marketplace, flea market-y kind of things. And he does raku stuff. And I'm like, hey, do you ever have any broken pieces? And he's like, yeah, I do. I said, I'll buy them from you. So he sold me a box full of broken stuff, and I just smashed the heck out of that because raku is so awesome. It's got this iridescent metallic, look to it. And then it's paired with some citrine and a mother of pearl and some coral. But I like just putting these things together, and I don't really have any notion of where they're going. I know some people like to sketch things out, and I do that sometimes. But on something like this, I just see where it takes me. I have a bucket of things in front of me that amuse me, and I just see where I go with it. And most of the time they turn out good. Once in a while, something that's interesting. So I usually just set that aside. I'll come back to that one later, and maybe it'll become something, but I like that. There's no pressure for something to be a certain way. It can just take its own little evolution. Plus, man, those Australian opals, I tell you, when I run out of those, I'm going to have to come back down and get more, because those were wonderful to play with.
So we've got a collection of brooches here.
Indeed. And you can see, I love this form, and it's the same kind of thing. Top one, that's got that little pink orchid peeking out at us. We made that one together. And then later on, we made this little pendant that's got an orchid on it. Now let's add it to a mosaic. So it was like a two-part thing. And I like doing that. I like being able to create something and then build upon it. So anybody who wants to wear it as a piece of jewelry, great. But if you feel like going on to something more elaborate, then you can do that too. You'll see that I use that gold scratch through thing often. Down towards on the bottom, in the one that's the square shape, that is actually something interesting. One of the techniques I like to share with people is how to make a faux ceramic. So essentially it's polymer clay. I've pressed a stamp in it. I've used glaze, just a clear varnish that is compatible with polymer, mixed with powders to get that kind of ceramic look. So it has a feeling of a shard of ceramic, but it's actually just polymer. So it's fun to be able to do those imitation looks, and polymer is just really good at that. It can fake wood, it can fake amber and other precious stones, it can fake pottery, there's leather. It's very mimicky, which I find very delightful to play with that. And the red one, I think, is interesting because I don't know if you can really see it well, but there's a little copper arching curve with a little flourish on there. That was a piece of something I picked up that had like that Celtic pattern on there. And it was a broken thing. And again, I always have my eye open for broken things at op shops and thrift stores and jumble sales and flea markets and that kind of thing. And any little broken bit like that become something again. So it's a way of reusing things that have artistic lines and beauty to them, but we lost the other half of the earring, or somebody stepped on this part. Being able to embed them into the epoxy clay and maybe putting more clay on top and adding crystals or whatever lets you reuse some of these special little pieces and do something fun with them. So that's what that was about. This was part of a class that I taught for Curious Mondo, which was a series of ocean designs. This octopus was one of those. I don't know about you, but I find octopuses like super fascinating. Everything about them is weird and alien and strange. And of course, now I know you guys have the most poisonous octopus in the world down under, and it's a beautiful little thing too. We have quite a lot of octopuses here in Maui that don't kill you. My brother's a snorkel guy, and we go out together and snorkel. And this last time that I went, it was a really good day for octopus. There was like 3 or 4 or 5 of them that I happened to see, and I just love all the little wiggly hands. I just like how they move. They just are crazy. And so I really wanted to incorporate an octopus into the scene. So again, that polymer mixed with the mosaic, I just feel like it's a great combination. And then you can use those seed beads. So if you're a beader and you have buckets of beads left over from whatever, bead embroidery or project you were working on, you can just have a big old bead soup mix and just go nuts with it and just stick it everywhere.
Obscene amount of beads, because I've been teaching beading for far too long. My bead collection, I could be doing this for years and still not run out of beads.
And that doesn't stop us from buying more. Another octopus, love those things. I had fun with this one. I like letting those lines be seen, almost like that woodcut style. I think any of us that are creatives, which is going to be a large portion of the people watching this, may have our favorite art style or our favorite art material. But in general, we know a good design when we see one. We can appreciate other kinds of artwork, even if it's not the one we do. And I find myself endlessly fascinated by fiber art, quilting art, line drawings, wood cuts, anything like that, just like trying to deconstruct, how do they make that? How can you mimic the look of those lines? I find inspirations, and this was one of those days when I must have been looking at a lot of etchings and woodcuts and that kind of thing, and mostly woodcuts, because you get that leftover of how the chisel carves through. And it's much easier because all I'm doing is scratching on the surface of something. Another wall piece. I'm an orchid fan.
Yes.
I love orchids, and I think that's another reason why I like being here. I'm lucky in that I sit at my table and I look out and I can see this full-blown plumeria tree, which they bloom all year round, and then behind it are the mountains. So I've got a great little view, but it happens to be a perfect window for orchids. It doesn't get too much sun, it's just right. So I have a row of them, and as soon as one finishes blooming, I like tuck it back here or whatever, just let it rest for a bit and bring in another blooming one. So I've just constantly got orchids in my face. I love them. So I do find that is a theme that repeats itself quite often. I've done quite a number of orchid things just because they're fascinating. But there's something fun about this. So this is the polymer in the middle with all the little gold leaf covered tiles that I'm snipping up to make those little polymer bits. But if you can see those little porcelain looking things that are going up the top, those are porcelain that had just the most beautiful finishes on them. So I got my hammer and I just smashed them to see what would happen, because I like smashing things. And they made the most delicious little shards. So I've embedded those in, and I've got a lot more of them, and they're even more fun broken into bits. The moral of the story is smashing is good if you're an artist. You can smash as much as you like.
This is glorious.
And see more smashing. There's smashing bits of pottery in here and some glass bits. So this is the whole orchid concept gone a little bit crazy. I would do these all day long if I didn't have other things that also I had to do, but it's got lots of stuff going on in it, including some rubies tucked in there and polymer as well as other pieces. But it's funny, sometimes people will say, how do you know when you've got enough stuff on there? Because it's easy to overdo it. And I know that there are principles involved, and sometimes you get making something and you just think, oh shoot, I better stop, this is too much. I find when I reach that point where it's too much, that I just double down and go more, because I'm not gonna be able to undo it. So I might as well just go full blast. This is one of those. So it's just like, all right, you think it's busy now? You just wait a minute, let me add and add. And sometimes that works. I think this was one of those times when it did work. Other times it's kind of, you should have stopped. So those go in the chuck it bucket, but to be rescued later. Seed beads make fantastic mosaic components. Just leave them on the strand, on the thread, and you just press them into the epoxy clay and then pull the thread out, and more pottery shards, a lot of crystals, still more of those delightful opal chips and gold leaf. So I think you're seeing a sort of signature look that I've got going on here. Stuff that's smashed, golden things, and whenever possible, opal.
Oh, it was steampunk.
Yeah, isn't steampunk a cool look? It's been around a long time. And all of a sudden it went from being an underground thing that only a few cool kids knew about to suddenly like everybody and their brother knew about it for 10 minutes. And then now it's like a thing that we do sometimes. It had its, big moment in the sun, but it's not as explosive as it was for a little window there. But I find it still an amazing sort of look, because you're incorporating a lot of leather looking things and gear things and that whole idea of mechanized and automatons and just combining of that gear driven mentality. And I love adding it to any kind of creature to make it look like you just put the key in and you wound it up and it's about ready to do its little music box thing. This is one of my tutorials. So you can, if you want to make your own little steampunk Pegasus, there's a tutorial for that on my website. But it's fun. And this one's all polymer except for obviously all these gears. I always love making little steampunk creatures.
I wonder what goes on in your brain.
I know people have asked me that before too. And they're like, is there a crazy mess in there? I don't think that it is, but maybe if somebody else peeked in there, they would be like running in horror. But there's always something going on in there. I think this is something that is like one of the most simple ideas, and we get right back to that texture with the fabric and the textiles you can do with polymer so easily, is just making these little stripes, making these like patterns, these little chevron type patterns, Bargello type patterns, and just cutting them out and laying them on another piece of clay. I use a lot of powders, and I haven't really talked about that too much. You can see it here in the center of the flowers, how it gets darker there. I'm using chalk powders, pastel powders, different kinds of things like that. So this would be like a little brooch or a pendant. When I taught in-person classes, a lot of times we would do this as a great way to limber everybody up. This one started off as a tea tin. So inside there's one of those little metal tea canisters, and I covered it all with polymer clay, because it's a metal tea tin, it can go right in the oven. And then once it was baked, I added all the mosaic and all of that metal look. So that metal is actually a product called Swelligan. It's a product line that I carry. I developed it with a company that does a lot of things for metal and patina, people who cast in metals and work in metals. They have a tremendous line of things. And I talked to them and said, I love this stuff. Would you pour it into little bottles for me? And they said, absolutely not, but we'll work with you if you want to do it. And I'm like, okay. So we put together this line. And what I love about it, it's that it's low or no odor. It's soap and water wash up. It's non-toxic, non-hazardous. And essentially what it is, it's a series of 5 pulverized metals embedded in clear acrylic base. You've got copper and silver and brass and bronze and iron. And then you can coat just about anything with that, build up layers. So you're actually cladding something in metal. And then there's a series of patinas and dyes so that you can take that copper in this case and add the oxidation to it. And it is real copper that really oxidizes, but you can put it on plaster or greenware in a bisque-fired ceramic, or in this case, polymer or epoxy, or cloth or fabric, or leather. It goes on anything. And then you can turn it into the look of an old metal. And then I added the mosaics there too. I was very inspired by Gaudi with all of his architectural mosaics in Barcelona. And so this is an homage to Gaudi's kind of the way he did these rounded forms on these strange organic forms in his architecture.
Gaudi is my favorite architect in the world. In fact, I don't know if you can see it, but the quilts hanging behind me are both Gaudi inspired. So
his art, the way he looked at the world is absolutely just brilliant. This is one of my favorite little weirdo things ever. And I have no idea what or why. It definitely has that little shop of horrors to it. I did it for a class. It's now a tutorial you can download from my site. And remember, I was talking to you about like making limbs out of epoxy clay with wire in it and sticking them onto a glass. So there's a test tube, there's a glass test tube under there. And then there's all these legs attached to it that are then covered with polymer and added crystals and all the rest of that. I love the idea that something that shouldn't get up and walk away is. So a lot of times I'll do these sort of floral vessels that are just wandering. So that's what this was about. But there's days when everything comes together well. And I try to look at those days and figure out the formula, like what was working here? Why did this one work? So I can duplicate the concept anyway. But I don't know, the colors worked.
You've got a studio tour on YouTube, haven't you? The link for it is down below in the description box. which you said is your bedroom and not much else space. So if you want to see how Christi fits everything into her very small space and still manages to create amazing artwork, I recommend you watch this video. It's really cool. And we've talked a bit about your books, and these are just 3 of them. There should be a zillion on the website, but I believe you've got a favorite couple.
I started off with these, like Dragon was the very first book, and I self-published even way back, however long these go back to 2000 or whatever. And I did Dragons because I thought, okay, I don't know how this self-publishing thing's going to work, but I'll do Dragons because then if the polymer people go, what the heck, then maybe the fantasy people also like it. So it was like a good way of hedging my bets, but it's been a good seller ever since. And it just was a very step-by-step. It allowed me to lay it out however I wanted. And there's 8 in the series. And then when steampunk hit, I did a whole steampunk book. My favorites, there's a couple more that you can get on my site. And I think you can get them for Amazon and stuff too. I don't think it's like Kindle ready. It's more of a downloadable PDF that you would read on your tablet or your computer. This goes back to my sort of philosophy of, I know there's different ways to look at creating art. And I've always been of the opinion that I'd like to teach you how to make a thing. And in making that thing, you're learning techniques and processes that you can then adapt to your own expectations and your own experimentations. But at the end of doing it, we need that payoff. I'm going to make a chameleon and look, it looks like a chameleon. Yay. Now, you may not like, oh, I love chameleons forever, I'm going to make a million. You might, but you might just go, okay, that was interesting. I'll never use this, but I learned how to overlap clay and I learned how the structure works or whatever it is you may be picking up from that. So most of my books are very project driven that way, but there's a lot of techniques. I try to mix it up all the time. So my favorite is my most recent, and it's still been several years since that one. I haven't put a new one out for a while, but it's called Do You See What I See? And it is a little bit of a departure from purely the project driven thing in that we explore concepts and creative ideas a bit more. There's still plenty of projects and there's a lot of talk about various techniques, but it's filled with a lot of stories from my travel and little doodles and sketches of, okay, what would it be like if we did this or that or the other? So it's got a lot of that creative nudgery going on. And then of course we were talking about the projects too. Exactly the same thing as I have for years now. I've had a membership group that I come up with new projects every month. So you can get those by being a member of the group. But once that, month is over, then they go for sale. You get a better bargain by being a member of the group, but they then do go for sale. And these are some of the things. And you can see, I just put up this floating flowers recently as a little freebie. It's a several page how-to using one of my stamps, but the technique will work with any number of texture stamps. I like to have a lot of things up there to play with. And there's, we said earlier, maybe 100, 150. Yeah.
I'm exhausted, Christi. Your energy is boundless. It's just amazing. Your website is really busy, and I noticed you've got products as well.
I do have some stuff for sale, especially what I really love is I've got a couple of tools that I've had specially made that are my go-to tools. Love them. And I've been lucky enough to have them now for other people to buy as well. So if you're looking for a great tool, I got that. But the other thing I like to do is that when I find these little bits and pieces on all my journeys, if I can get more, I have some for me and then I have some for sharing, and those go up on the site too. I try to keep unique things there, things that you can't get everywhere else.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate your time today. I'm looking over there at my bead collection and thinking, okay, now I've got these special beads that I can do something a bit more interesting rather than just have them sitting in containers staring at me. You feel guilty for not using them.
I love chatting about stuff and about the stories of creativity. I think that's inspiring for everybody to see someone's journey and pick from it anything that helps them and theirs. So I like sharing that. So I appreciate that you wanted to have me, chat with you about this kind of stuff.
Oh, it's been great. Thanks so much, and bye for now.